Okay, so welcome to Cozy Talk. So today we're going to be going over women in horror movies, specifically their archetypes. So get cozy, get your snacks, get your tea, get your water. I have mine, some tea. I'm always drinking tea. And we'll just hop right into it.
You give me butterflies when you smile, and it feels so good, I just can't hide.
So the first things first, the quintessential first archetype that most people are able to recognize in their horror movies. And if you see me looking over, that is because that's where my notes are. They're right here. So yes, I do have my notes right next to me, so if you see me looking over, just know that's what that is. But the first one we have is the last girl trope. So we all know her, we all love her. We all sometimes hate to see her coming, but the last girl. We have the good for her trope, which is a newer trope. It is a trope that there is a little bit of a discourse on, is right now my favorite trope to the chagrin of a lot of people that I know. We have the monster woman trope. We have the yikes for her trope. We have the black girl who always dies. You can also know this is just a smaller subgroup of the black person that dies trope. We have the black girl who wins, which is a subversion of the black people always die. Well, then there always has to be someone who wins. We all know their Madonna horror complex. Yeah, we sadly do have to speak about the promiscuous woman who dies first. So that is just the list of the archetypes we are going to go over tonight. Of course, we're going to definitely go into deeper context and deeper detail about these archetypes, how they've changed over time, the sexist nature of a lot of these archetypes, not to mention the racist nature of these archetypes. We're also going to go into a little bit on how these archetypes have evolved over time and where some of these archetypes even came from. Mind you, a lot of these archetypes actually branched off from each other. So there is going to be a lot of similarity in how I'm going to speak about a lot of these archetypes, purely because they come from the same place. It is what it is. But we will have a wonderful time here at Cozy Talk talking about why that might be and how people see these archetypes now these days. And, how women see these archetypes. And if you are someone who is looking to make a film or to start something, be it a short film, a short story film, anything, and it is in the horror subcontext or genre, I should say more, then maybe you can use my video as a branch off point as to whether or not you would like to put any of these women within your story. Or if you have a different version or way of seeing these women, please do leave a comment below, and a like and a follow if you can as well. So, let's start off with the first girl. Or, well, no, the last girl is her genre's name. She is the quintessential first female archetype to almost ever really exist within the horror genre. Not saying there aren't others. There are. There absolutely are. The promiscuous woman that dies first has existed longer than her. But, the last girl has a lot more recognition. Let's look at how the last girl evolved. So, first things first. The last girl in her original connotation. The last girl in her original connotation was pure. She was smart, but she does die in the end. Now, of course, as I said before, this is not an across-the-board thing. These tropes have evolved over time, and the way that I see these tropes may be completely different from how you view them. But right now, we're just going to go off of my viewpoint and how a few other people have seen these tropes and how they've evolved in people's eyes. Now, for example, for the first pure lives the longest but definitely dies in the end, we have Nosferatu, right? So it's a movie about these people and they're fighting against a vampire. And our last girl, though she does outsmart, well, her peers and the vampire, she does end up subsequently dying in the end to the very creature that she just outsmarted. So, that's her first iteration. That's the first existence, the first time we see her. And I'm not saying that's the first movie she's in, I'm just giving an example. That is just one example of many, okay? But then we get to move on to the women who do live. The last girl who lives to see the end of the story, who gets to tell the tale. And, for example, we have the movie Halloween. Now, okay, so we go from the smart, pure girl that dies to the smart, pure girl that lives with Laurie and even fights back. But what do we have to give up when we get this new character, when this trope evolves? Well, Laurie ends up having to give up the thing that makes her a woman, her femininity. To be the girl that lives, to be the last girl, Laurie must shed herself of her femininity by, one, not giving into any feminine desires, which means, once again, she must be pure, but two, she has to be a tomboy. She cannot be, like the rest of her friends, gushing over a boy at school. She cannot be trying to gain a boyfriend. She has to fight back. She has to be a tomboy. Her character differs in the movie by being observant, not boy happy or boy crazy, paying attention to the things around her, which, if you know women, like any woman, they tend to be hyper vigilant and hyper aware anyway. But apparently Laurie is special in the way that she is doing it, and also special in the fact that, well, she can fight back. She takes the knife, she fights back, she doesn't allow him to kill her. But even though she must give up her femininity in the way of how she dresses, maybe her wants and desires, she still must fall into being feminine. She must still be a pure woman. No way can she be tainted. And on top of that, well, she must still scream, cry, and holler for the amusement of the more than likely male audience. Well, now you're thinking, okay, well, we have two versions of her now. Both of those versions don't seem to match with what we have today. Well, you would be correct. The last girl does have a different iteration. Well, you're thinking, okay, so we do have two archetypes here. They are the same archetype, but two different versions from two different timelines. And Laurie as a character does get to evolve and grow throughout the Halloween film's runnings. But who can we thank for that? Well, that's where we'd have to go to Scream, another very popular slasher film that gets a lot of recognition for the Sydney effect. Now you're thinking, what the hell? What is the Sydney effect? Well, the Sydney effect is where we get Sydney from Scream. Now, she outsmarts her killers by knowing the horror archetypes. Her knowledge on what horror is and the characters that are seen within horror allows her to get through this film while having sex, because she is not a virgin. She loses her virginity, meaning in her would-be killer's eyes, she must die, because she's now a part of the horror archetype. She can no longer be the last girl that gets to survive. and kills her killers. She does it. She gets to somewhat stay within her femininity, break free from the pure archetype of the last girl, and gets revenge. Though she does go through a lot of trouble to get there. Then you have the quintessential last version of the last girl. Now, everyone knows her, everyone loves her. It's the one that we see most in films more often than not, and even plays into, as I said before, a lot of other archetypes. And she is the girl that gets to live and stays feminine. Completely doesn't care. She outsmarts her killers. She gets to live. She hunts her killers even sometimes. She's feminine. She has sometimes a husband, sometimes a boyfriend. Lord knows she's just not a virgin. Sometimes she is within what we would say is the very promiscuous side of things. But throughout, she still ends up winning. She is on top of it, though she still gets tortured. She's on top of it. And she does not let the betrayal get to her, whatever that may be. And you get to see that in the movie Ready or Not. Our main character goes through so much, but in the end, instead of letting her feelings and emotion cloud her judgment, she fights for her life from what she thinks is more than likely some weird, not correct, not real tradition of a new family she's going into. She's not a virgin, we know this, because she's been with her boyfriend who turned husband for quite some time within the movie. She tries to get on her in-laws' good side before everything that happens. And throughout, to get out of the situation, no matter who she comes across, which at one point was a child, a literal kid. And she had qualms, but she took care of what she needed to take care of to be able to get out of the situation she was in. And in the end, when she found out, along with the rest of the family, that yeah, the curse was correct and it was very real, she still allows her very own husband to die because of his betrayal. Though she comes out of it bloodied, absolutely probably in pain, both physically and mentally, she comes out of it on top. And I think that is the full encompassing nature of what the last girl is in today's media. And of course, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, but doesn't that fit into another trope? Yes, you would be correct. She also fits into the good for her trope. A lot of people will look and watch this movie and think, yep, no, everything that happened to this family was well deserved. And it was. You feel catharsis when you watch that movie. You look at that movie and you think, well, damn. Yet, no, you deserved all of that. You deserved it. Because why would you do it? Why would you make the deal in the first place? And why would you bring unsuspecting people into the mess your family has created? Let's use another example. So if we're just talking the good for her trope, which is a trope that is made, it is a branch off from The Last Girl. Do not be mistaken, The Last Girl as a trope has so much weight within horror movies and a lot of movies in general, that she has created most of the tropes that we see today. For most of these women, to be within their trope, they must win the game. They must be in the end of the movie. They have to succeed. So, for you to be within the good for her trope, 1, your actions as a character must be brutal. They have to be gruesome, but justifiable, be it within the storyline or by the audience. I must watch your story and think, yeah. Was it brutal? Yes. Was it justified? Yes. Did I feel some sense of catharsis? Yes. Was justice served? Maybe not legally, but served. Yes. You see this in movies like Carrie or even Hard Candy. Now, if you know anything about either of those two movies, both are really good and I would recommend watching. We have horrible people who gets their just desserts. Now, I'm talking about the original Carrie when I am talking about that movie. And Hard Candy, there is no other remake. So if you do search up either one, just make sure to pay attention to which thing, whatever you're watching, right? But in Carrie, we see a girl. And she's just gotten her period. And she is being relentlessly bullied by her classmates. And the only one that comes to her aid is a teacher who, by today's standards, is absolutely abhorrent and definitely in the wrong for a good few things, but has her heart in the right place, trying to help Carrie. We then meet her mother, who is a religious fanatic that is definitely abusing her daughter. Sad to say, but that is what it is. All of this to lead up to a plot surrounded by a prom where a very not so nice person decides to pull a prank on Carrie by dropping blood on her. Pig's blood. On the day that honestly was probably the happiest of her life. Throughout the movie, it does allude to the period being the reason she's getting her powers. It's the start of her getting the powers. It is the high emotion, the intensity, the hormones, the everything that comes with her period that amplifies her powers and make her powers do everything. Blood is a very big part of this movie. And we could say like it alludes to multiple things, but obviously this movie alludes to the nature of growing up for a woman, coming into adulthood for a young woman, and what that may look like, especially with the pressures of not only society, but their parents, religion, and a whole host of other things. Now, we see at this very same prom, Carrie kills, well, everyone, except one girl who ends up traumatized beyond compare, watching her classmates be trapped, die, and burn. And not only her classmates, but her teachers. And it's never fully clear what Carrie's seeing versus what's actually happening, if that's actually what's happening. At one point, we see that while Carrie is covered in blood, she sees the crowds laugh at her. But then we clip back and the crowds are horrified. And then it mixes. And we at no point know if that's correct. But either way, these very same kids within the crowd are still the same kids that did torment Carrie for what seems like her whole school life. We do not know whether or not Carrie is mentally disabled. It could just be the difference she has from being abused by her mother, or a multitude and host of other things, but in one way, shape, or form, Carrie is different, and those kids did torment her because of that, leading to their death. And in the end, when Carrie goes home, she's crying, she's looking for the embrace of her mother, she's once again betrayed by those she thought she could trust. Her own mother tries to kill her. Now, we don't know if the reason why her mother is the way she is because she did something with someone bad. And when I say that, I mean if the reason why her mother is a fanatic is because she slept with the devil or something like that created Carrie. which would, give a reason for her powers. But from the mother's story, it just seems like she slept with someone she shouldn't have. She had early premature sex without marriage. Obviously, that wouldn't create a child that has powers. But for some reason, Carrie's mom seems to equate her existence with getting her period, with just existing in a teenage woman's body, with sex, and therefore sin, and takes it out on her daughter. Something so natural becomes a pain point for her mother. In the room Carrie is confined in, there is a statue of Jesus, and when her mother is attacking her, and they get downstairs, right as Carrie's powers are going absolutely out of control, her mother gets slain, and she is placed in the same way Jesus is. The same way the statue is. And in the end, that does mean that Carrie sees that, and be it from trauma or whatever, the whole house falls down on them as she tries to get her and her mother into a place that she deems is safe, which is the same room that she's confined in and tortured. And I do count confining your child and locking them away, forcing them to pray in an uncomfortable looking room as torture. That is torture. I will not be taking any quotes or any. That's not really torture. No, that's torture. That is mental and physical abuse. She was mentally and physically abused by that woman. And she's horrible, and she deserved to die. Some will say that they don't think this is really a good for her trope, only because Carrie does die in the end, but I feel like she gets enough revenge. At the end of the movie, honestly, what is Carrie going to do with her life after everything that happens? It feels necessary, or maybe not necessary, but it doesn't feel wrong that Carrie ends up not being alive in the end, if only because, well, she did murder a whole school of children and teachers and her own mom, so she does not have anywhere to go, and the whole house fell down. Carrie would not have had anywhere to go. So I feel like being released from her mental agony was the best option for Carrie at that point. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Carrie was a little bit of a monster. You wouldn't be wrong. But let's get into it. Why are women the monsters in a lot of horror movies? It's usually women or children, but why is it usually women and children? Why do we not have a lot of male monsters? And when I say that, I mean visually male monsters. If it's a child, it looks like a child. If it's a woman, it definitely looks like a woman. A demented one, but a woman. Even if the monster, like an alien or a xenomorph, is male, you would never equate it to the human male body. They are obviously an alien or xenomorph. So why are women and children always the monsters? Well, today we're going to be focusing mainly on women. I can't really tell you much about why children, the creepy little things, are always somehow placed into a horror type situation. It's probably something to do with children are pure, and to see something that's supposed to be pure be scary is, does something to the brain. But for women, well, let's look at The Witch, shall we? Now, The Witch. It is a movie with a girl, Thompson, and she ends up becoming the very thing her family fears. She's manipulated and turns into the very witch her family did not want her to be after her family is killed. Now, she's manipulated by not only her family, but a goat, which is alluding to being the devil. She is completely pushed into his arms, though, by her family. And isn't it sad? The girl would have never been a witch if her family had trusted, believed her, or even showed some care and compassion in not claiming she is off the bat. But her family already being thrown away by their community, forced to leave, then gets to a new farm, in which mysterious things keep happening, in which they blame their child for, who could have had, honestly, no physical way to do so. Calling her a witch, alluding to that she's the problem, the reason why they're in a mess that they created themselves. In the end, they all die, and she goes into the woods, becoming the witch that they feared she already was, pushed into the arms of the devil himself. And that is not the only story of a woman who usually, from either the lack of understanding, revenge, or betrayal by people that she loves and cares about, becomes monsters. Or even protectors of other women, monsters to some, protector to others. Think about Mexican folklore with the deer woman. She is a woman who is part woman, part deer, and she hunts men who would do harm to women. She is a protector of women, a monster to others. Think about the Japanese folktale about the smiling woman. She is a woman that has a mask on her face and will come up to you when you are alone, ask you whether or not you think she's beautiful. And when you answer, she will then take off her mask and ask you again, yes or no, do you think I am beautiful? In which, no matter what your answer is, if you feign horror because her mouth is cut open side to side making a smile at what she looks like, she will kill you, and if you say yes, she will scar and disfigure you the same way she is disfigured. Her story, if you would like to know, starts off with her being betrayed by the one she loves and disfigured by them. Her beauty was something that she was praised for, sought after for, only for it to be the very same thing that attracted the person who ended up disfiguring her. And there are a multitude of other stories where the woman ends up being the monster, normally from some form of betrayal that has happened to her. Her story is always hard and brutal. Now, those are just folklores. They really have little to nothing. Well, not that. And those are just folklores. Not even actual horror movies that I could point towards. There are stories given down from grandma to granddaughter, from granddaughter to niece, nephew, cousin, from family to family, growing, expanding, changing over time. But then, let's get into it. Now, you're probably thinking if there's a good for her trope, there's definitely, there has to be a yikes for her trope. And there is. Now, this is also new, and it is a subversion of good for her. The yikes for her trope is a story where you would think it would be a good for her trope if the ending wasn't the way it was. Now, some will allude to this being kind of like Carrie. If you believe that Carrie dying at the end makes this a yikes for her, then that is up to you. I do not think Carrie is a yikes for her, but we will get into a story that is a yikes for her. But the yikes for her trope stems from a woman who usually gets manipulated in some way, shape, or form, ending in the situation she's in at the moment. Now, I like to think that Midsummer is a yikes for her trope. Though at first you think this is going to be good for her, she has a subpar boyfriend who is kind of mean. they go to this. Honestly, you shouldn't have been there. I think it's dumb that they went there in the first place, but let's not talk about the idiocies of characters, as the movie would not have been created without the stupidity of a character or two. But they go to see this cult, which already has a pretty bad reputation, in which, they're manipulated. And our main character ends up being manipulated into killing her friends and boyfriend, and joining a cult. The decisions that get made are her friends are picked off one by one for snooping in the cult affairs. Though I do not think the cult would have let them live or leave either way, but they do get picked off. Finding their perfect victim, the cult then orchestrates exactly what is necessary to have them fall into that trap. Finding our main character as the perfect victim, not only do they drug their boyfriend, having them see it, in which their boyfriend drugged and honestly not really consenting, then goes ahead and sleeps with one of the cult members, which is more than likely just a way to make sure there is no inbreeding, as getting pregnant and inbreeding would cause a lot of issues. They then cry with her. They let her see her boyfriend, who once again is drugged and is not consenting, sleep with a woman, only to then cry with her as if commiserating, bringing her into the fold of the cult. Because then she becomes the winner. She is the queen of the festival. And instead of picking one of the cult members to die and be sacrificed, how could she? They commiserated with her. They were there with her. She picks her boyfriend, the man she's supposed to love, who has betrayed her because she does not have any of the context of that betrayal, and kills him along with their friends, joining the cult. And we know she joins the cult because in no point of the story, as she is smiling with this cult, do you see her realize the horror of what has happened. She's not aware that she's been indoctrinated. She's just indoctrinated. And it's a yikes. Because you cannot always be the queen of the festival. You will now be participating within that cult, and they will not let her go. Yikes for her. The next thing we have, and we're all thinking it, last but definitely not least, is the black woman that gets to live. Yeah, that's very hard to come by. Normally, the black character always dies first. They're a pawn, a trope, not even really a character. They're just there to fill the void of death, really. They're there so that the main white lead, usually male, and the main white female lead live a little bit longer. They are the roadblock. Temporary as they may be. They allow for our female lead, but they just allow for our white characters to keep going while someone else gets bludgeoned. Now, this trope is highly scrutinized and will probably stay highly scrutinized and mocked as long as it's around, because, as we all know, it makes no sense for one archetype or character to keep dying and to not be fully fulfilled as a character. What is the point of a character's death if we care not about who that character is? And sadly, the black person who dies first, well, that is the uncared about character. To subvert this, we have, the black character that gets to live. They are now allowed to be the last girl. And I do mean it when I say the last girl. There are still very few black male characters that get to live. Though we have seen it and it is done, and there are still way less of both of these archetypes than anyone would like to see. But in Us, we get to see the tethered. Now, the tethered are people that live underground. They were made to be, well, the exact copy is the people who got to live at the top of the ground, who went their day-to-day lives doing day-to-day life things. Like, they got to just live their life, and usually this is for blood donations, organs, any of those things. People didn't even know they were there or existed until the situation that happened. In the movie, we get to see our main character, who is not only a tethered and a villain in her own right, but the heroine of our story, as she succeeds in getting her and her family out into safety, while also sadly allowing her story to be out there and to us, showing that she is a tethered who replaced her person on the top, on the surface, as a child. She escapes by sacrificing someone else. Now you're probably thinking, okay, well, she's a villain. She's also the hero, but she is a villain. The thing that makes this so unique is because she is a affluent black woman surrounded by a middle-class affluent white woman, and she just didn't die first. The white people did, which does not happen often. She is in the exact setting that gets many a black character before her dead, and she survives. Sure, with a lot of trial and tribulation, a lot of error on her part, but she does survive. She gets to live. And that is a feat of its own. Now, as we go on, and there are many of other tropes that I can get into, I would get deeper into the horror trope, but we all know it, and honestly, I don't want to give it as much attention, and honestly, it's gotten a lot of attention, and there is definitely videos out there that can do a deeper, more in-depth analyzing of that trope and why it is an issue. The most I can really say on that trope is you could probably find her in any of the older horror movies. She is more than likely dead because she slept with someone and wasn't paying attention to the killer. And she didn't deserve it. It is the sexism of the time that usually made you feel like she did. No one should think, I definitely shouldn't have any intercourse today because, well, a killer might break into my house unexpectedly and kill me while I'm at it. That is not the thought of any sane human. It definitely was not going to be the thought of any sane character. Now, you could always blame them for their lack of awareness or anything of that such, but as we've seen, many characters aren't aware yet don't end up dying. It is purely the sexism of the time that allowed us to think that it was okay that just because a woman was participating in what most teenage girls would find natural due to hormones and puberty, that she deserved to be offed because of it. And the reason we think that, well, it is because the main consumer of horror at the time was men. In the book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, in this book, the author, Carol J. Clover, goes over this a little bit. Now, this book is very old, so it does not hit as much as it could, because, well, she does not know about any of the newer tropes, like the newer last girl or any of that. None of that. She does not get any of that context. And she does talk about a little bit of that in the blurb before you read her book that is an add-on to everything. So she does talk a little bit about that. But she does coin in this book the term the last girl. And during this, she talks about the complex a lot of the killers in these horror movies have. They are made for a male audience, and so they deal with the frustrations of what a male audience would want. A lot of the times, depending on the demographic, these horror movies were looking for a certain demographic. Usually these were teenage boys or slightly older men. And their perfect victim was usually young, sexually active, and pretty. Usually the killers were a man/monster that was in some way, shape, or form sexually disturbed. They would take their anger out, usually, and this did evolve to be this way. Young, pretty, sexually active teenage girls. Now, we see this also evolve with, well, what's better than having one pretty, sexually active young teenage girl get gruesomely murdered? Have a gaggle of them. Have a ton. Alright? And to be fair, this book really only goes over 2 versions of this trope, the last girl trope to be specific, and does go into a good bit on why we have this trope where, usually in slasher films, obviously, this book did go based a lot off of slasher films, why these characters in slasher films that were the villain, man or /monster, was in some way sexually disturbed and had that form of a motivation or a deterrent. But it is a little bit outdated, so I don't know. We can't really get into that as much as I would like to. Yeah. Violence and sex, weirdly enough, is not used as 2 separate means to the same end, but seen as the same thing. Where you can have sex, instead they choose violence. It's a substitute, almost. If you cannot have one, then why not have the other? Because of this, I really do think that we have come a far way. Like, not to be pandering or anything of that sort, I feel like we've come a far way in how women are treated within these films and how these films are even seen and portrayed and things of that sort. But I do still see some of the sexist nature that does rear its ugly head within all of these tropes. Because as far as we get, there will always still be pieces that we hold on to. And we can work on that. Trust, we can always work and strive forward so that it is a lot easier to be able to watch these movies without immediately thinking, why did this character do that? That makes no sense. This is definitely sexist, or this is completely racist. Once again, making no sense. It is why we have parody movies where we have an all-black cast and they're trying to figure out who's gonna die first in a horror situation. It is why we have parody movies where everyone is playing a trope and everyone is doing a horrible job of it. But even still, I do think there is a lot of growth that the horror tropes have done, and a lot of growth that is to come and needs to happen to make it so that horror is as enjoyable as it can be for a lot of people, and not only enjoyable, but thought-provoking. I'm gonna say that's the end of my cozy talk. I hope you were very cozy as you listened to me ramble on about horror and tropes. I do thank you for tuning in. At the end of this video, you will be seeing a long list of recommended reads, recommended movies, recommended other videos to just get a little bit of a clearer, deeper dive into things. But other than that, have a cozy time, and I hope your snacks and your tea and your water was delicious while you listen.